So, what is school choice exactly? Well, in his book, Rethinking School Choice Limits of the Market Metaphor, Jeffrey Hennig says that educational choice involves expanding the freedom of families to send their children to schools other than the public schools in their assigned attendance zone. And essentially, this can be done by offering tuition tax credits, vouchers, or administrative procedures. And these are all choices that parents have, things that Jeffrey Hennig covers. And it's important to understand that these choices include homeschooling and public school, boarding school, cyber school, homeschool. So there's so many choices out there. So again, here's just a chart to show all the choices we have in our education system. There's charter schools, public schools, cyber schools, homeschool, private schools, Montessori, boarding schools. There's so many different options out there for parents. And the question really remains, is school choice beneficial? What are the benefits of having all these choices? And what are the dangers in a sense? So, what kind of competitions do they have, say, for funding? These are all questions that will be explored in this presentation. So, to answer the question, is having school choice good? In his article, The Political Economy of School Choice, Michael Heiss and James Ryan conclude that expanding school choice will lead to a few increases in education, and many of those increases are an increase in socioeconomic integration, student achievement, racial integration, and competition among private schools, leading to innovation and improvement. So these are all things that will arise out of having school choice in our communities. So to better understand what exactly Michael Heiss and James Ryan are saying is basically school choice is kind of like a pyramid in a sense. So our foundation here is having a choice, being able to discern which school is best for your child. And by giving us that foundation, socioeconomic integration will begin. So these schools are introduced into the communities, and by having a variety of students, that socioeconomic integration is really starting to take root. So we are introducing the classes into our schools. So not so much upper class, but we really have a mix in there. And having socioeconomic integration will lead to student achievement because students are now integrating with other students they might not normally meet or learn with. And because this environment is created, student achievement rises up. And on top of student achievement, racial integration begins to occur. So we're bringing in all cultures, all communities. Students are really learning in an environment with each other. And on top of all of this, with social economic integration, student achievement, racial integration, we can have better schools because we are now involving everyone in our school communities. Once again, I am here with my field educator, Lydia Ebby, as we examine the issue of school choice, homeschools, charter schools, cyber schools, traditional schools, and magnet schools in relationship to competition for scarce resources such as funding. So thank you, Lydia, for being here with me.
Always a pleasure, Katie.
So any thoughts on this school choice and what kind of conflict that leads to in competition for funding or
Well, funding is always a really tricky thing to talk about because funding should be given to, well, it should be given to places that need it, but it also should be given to places that deserve it. So it's always difficult to make that choice and realizing that, you might be sort of skimping on one group over another. So this is a great thing to be talking about. On the other hand, this idea of having schools that function differently in the education itself, while variety is a kind of hot word nowadays, and we can say that variety is good, having different standards of education, I'm not sure is a good thing. What is your thoughts on that?
I can see where you're coming from. I imagine that would lead to a lot of confusion, especially when you consider things such as funding. How can schools really compete for the same funding when they are so different? When they offer different things to students, which I think is, I think it's important that we have different schools to keep the competition fresh, alive, so that, they're always trying to produce the best education they can. I know earlier in one of our chats you mentioned they're not so much competing for funding, but really for students, which is an interesting tidbit, I thought.
And that's something that I think that we, in America at least, we could emphasize more, because that is lost so frequently, is that what schools really need to be competing for is to be able to attract students. And that means having the best education possible, and not getting away with focusing primarily on something like sports or computer sciences, both of which are very good, but that's not the same thing as education. And that's not the same thing as giving a good education.
Yes.
So when we talk about attracting students, getting the funding to do that is important. Getting funding for funding itself, not so important.
Yes. One question for you. Do you think schools should be rewarded with funding based on student test scores?
Absolutely not. What if test scores? Well, test scores are just not a very good standard to hold schools to begin with. But what I think is a better strategy to increase learning in schools is not giving funding per se, but getting good teachers. Now, funding absolutely can be a part of that, because good salaries should be given to good teachers, and if you can't pay a good teacher what they need to be paid and what they deserve to be paid, then you're not likely to get good teachers. But at the same time, if you're advertising positions based on salary, you're going to attract a lot of people who maybe aren't as skilled and talented in that area as well. So the focus, I think, in a lot of this just needs to shift. It's not about funding, it's about giving students a good education, an education that is competitive, and then getting teachers that are skilled at teaching and skilled in their fields, rather than simply getting a good salary. That's the word.
Yes. Well, I completely agree with you. Good teachers make all the difference. So thank you so much for that, and for being with me here today, and for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's been a lot of fun doing this with you.
Wonderful.